I pulled up to my ranch on a Sunday evening and found a for sale sign staked into my front gate. A red "sold" sticker was slapped across it like a trophy ribbon. Someone had clamped a realtor's lockbox onto the latch, my latch on my gate on land my father cleared before any of these subdivisions existed. I wasn't confused, I was furious. There were strangers in my barn, two of them, a man and a woman I'd never seen. Walking through the center aisle, measuring walls with a laser tool, snapping photos of the horse stalls like they were already planning renovations. A realtor in a navy blazer trailed behind them, tapping notes into a tablet. And there was Karen. She stood at the edge of my paddock with a clipboard pressed against her chest, pointing out across my acreage like she was giving a guided tour. Her voice carried across the yard, bright, confident, rehearsed. The outbuildings will need to come down, but the lot is worth 3 times what the HOA is asking. You're getting a steal. She was selling my ranch. I stepped out of my truck. Karen saw me and didn't flinch. She walked toward me with that stride she always used at board meetings, chin up, clipboard forward, the posture of a woman who believed her title made her untouchable. "Mr. Hale," she said, loud enough for the buyers and the realtor to hear. "The HOA board voted to authorize the sale of this parcel. You've been in violation for 3 years. You'll have 30 days to vacate after closing." The buyers looked at me, not with sympathy, with the dull discomfort of people who'd rather not meet the man being removed from his own property. The realtor glanced down at his tablet and said nothing. I looked at Karen's clipboard. I could read the header from 3 feet away. Board Resolution Number 2024-09, authorization to sell Parcel 14. Parcel 14, that was my ranch. And that resolution, I'd never seen it, never been notified, never voted on it because I was never part of her HOA in the first place. Karen tilted her head. "If you interfere with this transaction, I'll have the sheriff remove you for trespassing on HOA authorized property." Trespassing on the land my father bought in 1983, on the barn he built with his own hands, on the gate he welded from scrap iron the year I was born. I didn't yell, I didn't argue. I pulled out my phone and started photographing. The sign, the lockbox, Karen's clipboard, the buyers in my barn, the realtor's tablet, every face, every angle, every piece of this crime scene Karen was too arrogant to realize she was building. Karen watched me with a smirk. "Pictures won't help you. This is done." I put my phone away and looked at her. She had no idea the rancher she was trying to sell out from under held a deed that was 40 years older than every house in this subdivision, including hers. I didn't call the sheriff, I didn't call a lawyer, not yet. I walked inside, opened the fireproof safe my father left me, and put my hand on the one document that was about to end Karen's entire career as HOA queen. But I wasn't going to play it now. I was going to wait until she was sitting at that closing table with a pen in her hand. My family's ranch had been there longer than the street signs. My father bought the land in 1983. 40 acres of open pasture on the southern edge of what was, back then, nothing but farm roads and dry creek beds. He raised cattle for 20 years, built the barn himself, poured the concrete slab for the stable, welded the front gate from scrap iron he'd collected from old fence lines across the county. That gate was the first thing you saw when you turned off the highway, and it had his initials cut into the crossbar. Still does. The subdivision came in 2002. A developer named Brayburn Homes bought up the surrounding parcels, a few hundred acres of former farmland, and put in 62 single-family homes, a clubhouse, a pool, and a set of CC&Rs thick enough to prop open a barn door. They called it Brayburn Estates. The Homeowners Association was written into the development covenant the same year. My father's ranch sat right in the middle of it, like a stone the river had to flow around. The developer had tried to buy him out before construction. My father said no, so they platted around him. On the county's records, his parcel, Parcel 14, was marked pre-existing, non-annexed. It was never included in the HOA covenant, never assessed HOA dues, never subject to a single one of their rules. That was the legal reality. Karen's reality was different. She moved into Brayburn Estates 5 years ago, bought one of the larger lots on the north end, the kind with the stone front facade and the 3-car garage. Within a year, she was on the HOA board. Within 2, she was president. She ran unopposed. Not because people liked her, but because she'd made it very clear that anyone who challenged her would spend the next 12 months drowning in compliance reviews. Karen ran the HOA like a personal fiefdom. She had a binder, a physical tabbed, color-coded binder, that she brought to every board meeting. It contained every violation she documented, organized by address. Trash cans left curbside past 6 p.m., $75 fine. Basketball hoop visible from the street, $100 fine. Unapproved paint color on a front door, a shade of blue that was, according to Karen, not within the approved palette, $150 fine. She once fined an elderly widow named Mrs. Prescott for a garden gnome. The violation? Unapproved decorative object in the front yard setback zone. The gnome had been there for 9 years. Nobody fought her, not because they agreed, but because fighting Karen cost more than paying her. She knew how to use the bylaws like a weapon, stack fines, threaten liens, reference obscure clauses about community aesthetic standards that nobody remembered voting on. If you pushed back, she'd schedule a compliance hearing at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, knowing you'd have to take a day off work to attend. If you didn't show up, she'd rule in absentia and double the penalty. The neighborhood was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. It was scared. From the beginning, Karen hated my ranch. She called it the eyesore at board meetings. I heard that from more than one neighbor. She complained about livestock smell when the wind shifted south. She complained about the feed truck that came every 2 weeks. She complained about the sound of my tractor at 7 a.m. on a Saturday, even though the county noise ordinance didn't start until 8. She told homeowners at the annual meeting that my ranch was dragging down property values by at least $50,000 per home. She said it like it was a fact she'd had appraised. She hadn't. I tried being reasonable. I went to 2 HOA meetings, sat in the back, raised my hand politely, and explained that my ranch predated the subdivision by nearly 20 years, that it wasn't part of the HOA covenant, and that I wasn't subject to their rules. Both times, Karen cut me off before I finished. If your property is within our boundary map, you're subject to our rules. That's how it works, Mr. Hale. I pointed out that the boundary map was drawn by the developer, not the county, and that it didn't include my parcel. Karen looked at me the way you look at someone who just doesn't understand how things work around here. The board has reviewed the matter. Your property falls within our jurisdiction. If you disagree, you're welcome to hire a lawyer. Then the fine started. Small at first, $200 for unapproved fencing material. My fencing was barbed wire. It had been barbed wire since 1983. Then $150 for commercial vehicle storage in a residential zone. My horse trailer, parked in my own barn. Then $125 for failure to maintain approved ground cover. I had pasture grass. She wanted Bermuda turf. I paid the first 2. That was my mistake. Not because the money mattered. It didn't. But because paying told Karen something dangerous. That I could be moved. That I would bend. That if she kept pushing, eventually I'd sell or surrender or simply stop showing up. She was wrong about that, but I understood why she believed it. Most people in Brayburn Estates had already taught her that compliance was easier than courage. What Karen didn't understand, what she never bothered to check, was that my name wasn't just on a mailbox. It was on a deed recorded 4 decades before she ever heard of Brayburn Estates, and that deed didn't answer to her binder. 3 months before the sold sign showed up, Karen decided fines weren't enough. I found the certified letter in my mailbox on a Tuesday afternoon. Return receipt requested. HOA letterhead, bold font, Karen's signature at the bottom with her title printed underneath in all caps. President, Brayburn Estates Homeowners Association. The letter listed every fine I'd been issued over the past 2 years. 11 violations totaling $4,200. Unapproved fencing, commercial vehicle storage, ground cover non-compliance, exterior structure not consistent with community standards. That last one was my barn, the barn my father built in 1986. The final paragraph was the threat: failure to remit the full outstanding balance within 30 days will result in the filing of a lien against your property pursuant to Section 7.4 of the Brayburn Estates CC&Rs. The HOA reserves the right to pursue foreclosure proceedings to recover amounts owed. Foreclosure over a horse trailer and barbed wire fence. I set the letter on my kitchen table and read it twice. Not because I was scared, because I wanted to make sure I remembered every word. People who threaten you in writing are handing you a gift. They just don't know it yet. 2 weeks later, Karen showed up in person. I was in the barn replacing a stall latch when I heard a car pull up the gravel drive. I walked out and found Karen standing at my gate with a man I'd never seen. He was mid-40s, soft build, wearing a navy polo shirt tucked into khakis, carrying a clipboard with a pen clipped to the top. He looked like someone who'd been told to look official and was trying his best. Karen introduced him without being asked. Mr. Hale, this is our HOA compliance officer. He's here to conduct a property inspection pursuant to the board's authority. The man nodded once, didn't offer his name, and immediately started walking the perimeter of my fence line. He stopped every few yards to photograph something. The fence posts, the barn siding, the water trough near the south paddock. He held the clipboard up like a shield, writing notes I couldn't read from where I stood. I learned later from a neighbor that Karen's compliance officer was her brother-in-law, Dennis. He didn't work in code enforcement. He didn't work in real estate. He sold recreational vehicles at a dealership off the interstate. Karen had given him the clipboard and the polo shirt and told him to walk the property and take pictures. But I didn't know that yet. What I knew was that 2 people were on my land without my permission, documenting my property without a warrant, without an easement, and without a single legal right to be there. I walked over to them, kept my voice level. You need to leave my property. Dennis looked at Karen. Karen didn't look at Dennis. We have authority to inspect any property within the HOA district, she said. Same tone she used at board meetings. Flat, practiced, the voice of someone who'd rehearsed the line in her car on the way over. This is a routine compliance review. This property isn't in the HOA district. Our boundary map says otherwise. She held up a printout, a copy of the developer's site plan with a red circle drawn around my parcel in what looked like dry erase marker. And I have the board's backing. You can fight it in court, Mr. Hale, if you can afford it. She said that last part louder than she needed to. I understood why a moment later. Across the road, two of my neighbors, the Parkers, a retired couple who'd lived in Brayburn since it was built, were standing at the end of their driveway, watching. They'd heard the cars, they'd heard the voices. Karen wanted them to see this. She wanted the neighborhood to watch a man get inspected, documented, and threatened on his own land by the authority she believed she held. She turned toward the Parkers and raised her voice another notch. This is what happens when homeowners refuse to comply. The board will protect property values, with or without cooperation. The Parkers looked at each other, then they looked at the ground. Then they went inside. That was the part that stayed with me. Not Karen's threat, not Dennis with his clipboard, but the Parkers. Two decent people who'd seen something wrong and walked away because they were afraid of what Karen might do to them next. I didn't engage further. I stood at my gate and watched them drive off. Dennis waved from the passenger window, a little awkward, like he knew he'd been part of something he shouldn't have been part of. Karen didn't wave. She adjusted her mirror and pulled out without looking back. That night I did something I should have done 2 years earlier. I pulled out the HOA's covenant, the full document, not the summary they mailed to homeowners, and read it line by line. 62 pages of rules, definitions, enforcement procedures, and appendices. I found what I was looking for in Appendix B, the property schedule. Every parcel annexed into the HOA at formation was listed by number, legal description, and lot size. 62 parcels, 62 homes. Parcel 14 was not on the list. My ranch, the property Karen had fined, threatened, inspected, and was now preparing to lien, had never been part of her HOA. Not at formation. Not by amendment. Not by any legal instrument on file with the county. The covenant's own founding document excluded me. Karen had built her entire case on a developer's site plan with a red circle drawn in marker. I was holding the actual legal document, and her name wasn't anywhere in it that mattered. I set the covenant on the kitchen table next to the certified letter. 2 documents. One was a threat built on nothing. The other was the threat I needed to unravel everything Karen had spent 3 years constructing. She didn't know it yet, but she just handed me the beginning of the end. The knock came on a Thursday evening, just past 7. I opened the door and found Mr. Alderman standing on my porch. He was mid-70s, retired high school history teacher, lived 4 houses down on the east side of Brayburn. He was wearing a flannel shirt buttoned to the collar and holding a manila folder against his chest with both hands like he was afraid someone might take it from him. He looked over his shoulder before he spoke. Can I come in? I don't want her seeing my car here too long. I brought him inside, poured 2 cups of coffee, and sat across from him at the kitchen table, the same table where Karen's certified letter was still sitting. Alderman glanced at it, then nodded slowly like he recognized the stationery. She did something like this to the Chavezes, he said, 2 years ago. Maybe you remember them. Young couple, east side, had the double lot next to the retention pond. I remembered. Luis and Maria Chavez. They'd moved in around the same time as Karen, kept to themselves, had a vegetable garden in their side yard that their kids helped tend on weekends. They were gone by the following spring. I'd assumed they moved for work. Alderman shook his head. Karen fined them for the garden. Said it was an unapproved agricultural use in a residential zone. Luis went to a board meeting to argue it, and Karen hit him with 3 more violations the following week. Fence height, driveway staining, a kiddie pool that was an unauthorized permanent water feature. He paused, turned his coffee cup in his hands. The fines got up to about $6,000. Luis couldn't keep up. He was a tile installer. Good work, but seasonal. Karen told him at a closed meeting that the board could settle the whole thing if he agreed to sell his lot to the HOA at a reduced rate, called it a voluntary resolution. The board would forgive the fines and take the property. Luis didn't have a lawyer. He didn't know he could fight it. He sold for about 60% of market value. I sat with that for a moment. A family pushed out of their home by a woman with a clipboard and a binder full of rules she was making up as she went. What happened to the lot? Karen had it rezoned through the board as community green space, put a sign on it, Brayburn Estates Community Garden, managed by the HOA. She got the board to approve a special assessment to maintain it. 62 homeowners now pay $40 a year for a garden that used to belong to a family Karen ran out of the neighborhood. Alderman opened his manila folder. Inside was a photocopy of minutes from a closed HOA board session dated 18 months ago. He slid them across the table and pointed to item 7 on the agenda. Motion to authorize acquisition of parcel 14 for community development purposes. Moved by K. Whitfield. Seconded by D. Simmons. Vote 3-1 in favor. Parcel 14, my ranch. Karen had put my property on the board's agenda a year and a half ago. She'd gotten a vote to acquire it. Language vague enough to mean anything from a purchase offer to exactly what she was doing now. 3 board members voted yes. Karen Dennis Simmons, her brother-in-law, the man with the clipboard, and a third member named Gage, who rarely showed up to meetings but always voted however Karen told him to. The lone dissent was Alderman himself. I voted no, he said quietly. I told them they had no authority over that parcel. Karen said the board had consulted with the property attorney. I asked to see the opinion. She said it was privileged. He looked at me across the table. There was no attorney, Mr. Hale, I'm certain of it. She made it up the same way she makes up half the violations in that binder. I thanked him. I meant it. This man had driven over in the dark, looking over his shoulder, carrying documents he'd saved for a year and a half because he knew what Karen was doing was wrong, and he'd been waiting for someone to actually do something about it. The next morning, I drove to the county recorder's office. I hadn't been there since my father died, and I transferred the title into my name. The clerk was a woman named Deanna who'd been behind that counter for 20 years. I told her I needed 3 documents: the original deed for parcel 14, the subdivision plat for Brayburn Estates, and the HOA covenant as filed with the county. She had them pulled within the hour. The deed was recorded in 1983, my father's name, then mine after the transfer. Unbroken chain of title, no liens, no encumbrances, no notations of any HOA annexation, amendment, or covenant attachment, ever. The subdivision plat was recorded in 2002. It showed 62 numbered lots arranged around a central road network, with my ranch sitting in the center of the layout. Next to my parcel boundary, in small surveyor's font, were 3 words: pre-existing, non-annexed. The HOA covenant, also filed in 2002, contained the same property schedule I'd found in my own copy, Appendix B, 62 parcels listed. Parcel 14 was not among them. The county's version matched mine exactly. There was no amendment, no addendum, no subsequent filing of any kind that brought my ranch into the HOA's jurisdiction. 3 documents, 3 confirmations. Karen's entire case. Every fine, every threat, every compliance inspection, every vote to acquire my land was built on nothing. No legal foundation, no jurisdiction, no authority. I made certified copies of all 3. Deanna stamped and dated each one without comment, but as she handed them back, she said, "Somebody's been busy with a property they don't control. You might want to make sure these stay somewhere safe." I drove home, put the copies in my safe next to the original deed, and sat down at the kitchen table. The certified letter was still there. So were Alderman's meeting minutes. And now beside them, 3 county-stamped documents that proved Karen had spent 3 years fining, threatening, and trying to seize a property she had absolutely no authority over. I called my attorney that afternoon, not to file a complaint, not to send a letter. I told him one thing: I want to know when the closing is. I wasn't interested in stopping Karen early. Early meant she'd claim a misunderstanding, a paperwork error, a good faith mistake, a board decision she was just carrying out. I'd watched her do that to the Chavezes. I'd watched her do that to Mrs. Prescott with the garden gnome, to the Parkers who were too afraid to stand on their own driveway and watch. Karen didn't learn from warnings. She learned from consequences. So I was going to let her walk all the way to that closing table. I was going to let her sit down, open the file, pick up the pen, and then I was going to walk in with 40 years of receipts and end it in front of everyone who needed to see it. My attorney's name was Paul Egan, former real estate litigator, 23 years in practice, the kind of lawyer who read HOA covenants the way some people read mystery novels, looking for the lie buried in the fine print. I'd hired him 2 days after my visit to the county recorder's office, and he'd been quietly working the paper trail ever since. He called me on a Wednesday morning, and his voice had a weight to it I hadn't heard before. "Your ranch is listed on MLS," he said. "Active listing. Went live 4 days ago." I set my coffee down. "Listed by a licensed agency, Bennett & Cole Realty, out of the Ridgemont office. The listing agent is a man named Steve Trevino. He filed the listing based on authorization documents provided by Karen Whitfield, acting as," and I'm reading this directly, "authorized representative for disposition of non-compliant properties on behalf of the Brayburn Estates Homeowners Association." I asked the listing price. $1.2 million. 40 acres with a barn, a stable, 2 outbuildings, and a well, in a county where raw land alone was going for $40,000 an acre. Market value was closer to $2 million, maybe more with the structures. Karen had priced it at barely 60% of what it was worth. She wasn't trying to get a fair deal. She was trying to get a fast one. There's a buyer, Paul continued. Purchase agreement already signed. A developer out of Austin, Hightower Land Group. They put $30,000 into escrow last Friday. Closing is scheduled in 11 days. 11 days. Karen had listed my ranch, priced it to sell fast, found a buyer, collected earnest money, and scheduled a closing. All without my knowledge, all without my consent, all on a property she had no legal right to touch. I asked Paul about the authorization documents she'd given the realtor. That's where it gets criminal, he said. She gave Trevino a copy of Board Resolution 2024-009, the same one you photographed on her clipboard. It authorizes the sale of Parcel 14. It carries 3 signatures, Whitfield, Simmons, and Gage. Alderman gave me the original meeting minutes, I said. The motion passed 3-1, but it was for acquisition, language about exploring options. It didn't authorize a sale, and it was 18 months ago. It gets worse. I contacted Barbara Gage directly. She's the 3rd signer. What did she say? She said she never signed it. She said she hasn't attended a board meeting in over a year, and she's never seen Resolution 2024-09. She's willing to put that in a sworn affidavit. I let that settle. Karen hadn't just overstepped. She'd forged a board member's signature on a legal document, used it to authorize the sale of private property she didn't own, and filed it with a licensed real estate agency to legitimize the transaction. This wasn't an HOA power trip anymore. This was real estate fraud, forgery, theft by deception. Paul laid out the options. I can file for an emergency injunction this afternoon. We go before a judge tomorrow morning. Present the deed, the covenant, Gage's affidavit, and the forged resolution. Judge issues a temporary restraining order. Closing gets blocked. Done. It was the safe play, the clean play, the play any reasonable attorney would recommend. No, I said. Silence on the line. If we stop it now, she'll call it a misunderstanding. She'll tell the board it was a clerical error. She'll say she relied on bad legal advice, or that the resolution language was ambiguous, or that she genuinely believed the HOA had jurisdiction. She'll survive it. She always does. I'd watched Karen do exactly that with the Chavezes. When Luis tried to push back, she reframed the entire thing as a good faith negotiation. A voluntary resolution, a misunderstanding about fines, a board decision she was simply executing. By the time anyone looked closely, the lot was already rezoned and the family was gone. I want her sitting at that closing table, I said. I want the buyer there. I want the listing agent there. I want the title officer there. And I want to walk in with every piece of evidence and put it on the table in front of all of them. I want there to be no room for a misunderstanding, no room for a reframe, no room for Karen to pretend this was anything other than what it is. Paul was quiet for a long moment. There's risk, he said. If something goes sideways, if the closing somehow proceeds, if documents get recorded before we intervene, you could end up with a title cloud that takes months to clear. I understand the risk. Another pause. All right. I'll contact the title company to confirm the date, time, and location. I'll present as an interested party. No details beyond that. He called back that afternoon. First Regional Title, Oak Street office, Friday the 22nd, 9 a.m. Karen, the buyer's representative from Hightower, Steve Trevino as listing agent, and a title officer named Dana Brennan. I'll be there at 8:55, I said. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Karen's certified letter still sat, where Alderman's meeting minutes were stacked, where 3 county-stamped documents waited in a manila folder. I laid everything out in order. The deed, the plat, the covenant, the forged resolution, Barbara Gage's affidavit, the MLS listing printout, photos from the day I found strangers in my barn. 7 pieces of paper. Every one of them a nail in a coffin Karen didn't know she was building for herself. Closing was in 11 days. I had everything I needed. The only thing left was to let Karen keep believing she'd already won. Karen called a special HOA meeting on Thursday evening, the night before closing. I wasn't there. I heard about it afterward from Alderman, who sat in the back row and took notes on a legal pad he kept inside his jacket pocket. He told me everything. The room, the faces, the words. He told it like a man who'd been watching a slow-motion car wreck and couldn't look away. The meeting was held in the Brayburn Estates clubhouse, a beige stucco building next to the community pool with fluorescent lighting and stackable chairs arranged in rows. About 40 homeowners showed up, which was more than double the usual attendance. Karen had sent a special notice 3 days earlier with the subject line, "Exciting Community Development Update. Mandatory attendance encouraged." She stood at the front of the room behind a folding table. She'd dressed for the occasion. Blazer, press blouse, heels that clicked on the tile floor every time she shifted her weight. Dennis Simmons sat to her left. Gage's chair was empty. There was no agenda printed, no minutes being taken. Just Karen, a laptop connected to a projector, and the particular energy of a woman who believed she was about to be celebrated. She opened with a smile. "I'm thrilled to share some wonderful news with the community. After years of effort by this board, the property known as Parcel 14, the ranch property on the south end, has been sold. She paused for the reaction. A few people clapped. Most sat still. Alderman said the applause sounded like a handful of popcorn hitting a paper bag. Scattered, uncertain, polite enough to fill the silence but nowhere near enough to fill the room. Karen didn't seem to notice. She clicked to the next slide, a color rendering of a landscaped park with walking paths, a gazebo, a children's playground, and a sign reading Brayburn Community Park. The proceeds from the sale will fund a community green space that this neighborhood has needed for a long time. Walking trails, a playground for our children, native landscaping, and, most importantly, the removal of the structures and livestock operations that have been reducing your home values for over a decade. She said that last line with the certainty of someone reading a verdict, not proposing an idea, delivering a result. The park was already designed. The rendering was already commissioned. She'd already spent money on a future she was building with someone else's land. Dennis Simmons nodded along from his chair, arms crossed, chin tilted up, the body language of a man who'd been told he was important and had decided to believe it. A homeowner near the middle raised his hand. Alderman recognized him. Tom Beecham, mid-40s, engineer, had lived in Brayburn for 8 years and never once spoken at a meeting. Did the property owner agree to the sale? The room shifted. Not a gasp, more like a collective inhale. The sound of 40 people suddenly paying closer attention. Karen didn't blink. The board followed proper procedure under the CC&Rs. The owner was given multiple opportunities to come into compliance. When those opportunities were not taken, the board exercised its authority to resolve the matter in the community's interest. But did he agree? Beecham pressed. Karen's smile thinned by a fraction. The board acted within its legal authority. We consulted with a property attorney who confirmed our position. I'm not going to litigate this in a community meeting, Tom. Beecham sat back. He didn't look satisfied, but he didn't push further. The room went quiet again. That particular HOA quiet where everyone has questions and nobody wants to be the one who asks them. Karen moved on. She clicked through 3 more slides. A site plan showing the ranch structures removed and replaced with landscaping, a budget projection for Phase 1 development, and a timeline that started with closing Friday and ended with grand opening spring. She was already past the crime and into the celebration, already past the forgery and into the gazebo design. She had renderings, budgets, and timelines for a park on land she'd stolen, and she was presenting them to the community like a gift. Alderman told me he almost stood up, almost said something, but he looked around the room and saw what he always saw. People staring at their laps, people checking their phones, people who knew something was wrong but had been trained by 3 years of fines and threats to keep their mouths shut and nod. So he stayed seated. He wrote the time, the date, and every word Karen said on his legal pad. Then he folded it, put it inside his jacket, and drove home. He called me at 9:15 that night. I was at the kitchen table. She told them it was done, he said. She showed them a park. She had pictures, a budget, a timeline. She's already planning a groundbreaking ceremony. Good, I said. He was quiet for a moment. You're not worried? She just stood in front of 40 witnesses and took credit for selling a property she forged documents to list. Every person in that room heard her say the board authorized it. Every person heard her claim they had legal backing. I let that sit. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to walk into that closing with every receipt I have. And when it's over, every single person who was in that clubhouse tonight is going to know exactly what she did. Alderman exhaled slowly. What time is the closing? 9 a.m., First Regional Title, Oak Street. I'll be in the parking lot, he said, in case you need a witness. I thanked him and hung up. Then I went to the kitchen table one last time. I opened the manila folder, checked every document, every copy, every stamp, deed, plat, covenant, forged resolution, Gage's affidavit, MLS listing, photos, 7 documents, all in order, all dated, all real. I closed the folder, set my alarm for 6:30 and went to bed. Karen was at that meeting right now, or had been an hour ago, telling 60 homeowners she'd just sold my ranch, showing them a rendering of a park where my barn stood, clicking through slides of walking paths where my horses grazed. In 11 hours, she'd be sitting across a closing table at First Regional Title, pen in hand, about to sign away property she never owned. And I'd be walking through the door. Friday morning, 8:51 a.m. I parked my truck in the lot behind First Regional Title on Oak Street. Alderman's sedan was already there, 3 spaces down, engine off. He gave me a single nod through the windshield. I nodded back. I picked up the manila folder from the passenger seat. 7 documents. I'd checked them twice before leaving. Once more in the parking lot. Deed, plat, covenant, forged resolution, Gage's affidavit, MLS listing, photos, every page in order, every stamp visible. Every lie Karen had told over 3 years answered by a single piece of paper or a single signature she couldn't explain away. Paul Egan met me at the side entrance, dark suit, briefcase, reading glasses hanging from his collar. He looked at me the way a surgeon looks at a patient before an operation. Calm, professional, already past the point of second-guessing. "They're all inside," he said. "Karen, Trevino, the buyer's rep from Hightower, title officer named Dana Brennan. They started the document review about 10 minutes ago." "Good," I said. "Let's let them get comfortable." At 8:55, we walked in. The closing room was small, a rectangular conference table, 6 chairs, a water pitcher nobody had touched, and a stack of documents arranged in signature-tabbed folders at each seat. The fluorescent lights hummed the way they do in rooms where large amounts of money change hands quietly. Karen sat at the head of the table, blazer again, hair done, the posture of a woman who'd already decided this was her morning. To her right sat Steve Trevino, the listing agent, tablet open, pen resting on a folder. Across from him was the buyer's representative, a man in his 50s wearing a Hightower Land Group polo, reading glasses low on his nose, flipping through the purchase agreement. At the far end, Dana Brennan, the title officer, had a laptop open and 2 stacks of documents lined up with the precision of someone who closed deals every week and liked them clean. Karen saw me before anyone else did. Her expression moved through 3 stages in about 2 seconds. Recognition, confusion, and then something hard and flat that locked into place like a visor coming down. She straightened in her chair. "Mr. Hale, this is a private closing. You have no standing here and I need you to leave." She turned to Dana Brennan. "Can you call building security, please? This individual has no involvement in this transaction." Brennan looked at me, then at Paul, then back at Karen. She didn't pick up the phone. Paul set his briefcase on the edge of the table and spoke before anyone else could. His voice was level, courtroom level, the kind of calm that fills a room by refusing to compete with it. "My name is Paul Egan. I'm legal counsel for the owner of the property this closing concerns. My client is standing right here. His name is on the deed, and this transaction cannot proceed." The Hightower rep looked up from the purchase agreement. Trevino's pen stopped moving. Karen leaned forward. "The HOA is the authorized party for this sale. We've been through this. The board voted, the resolution is on file, and the listing was executed through proper channels. Mr. Hale has been in violation of community standards for 3 years and was given every opportunity to—" "Ms. Whitfield." Paul opened his briefcase and removed a single document, a certified copy of the deed, recorded in 1983, bearing my father's name and, after transfer, mine. He placed it in the center of the table, turned so everyone could read it. "This is the deed for Parcel 14, recorded with the county 41 years ago. Unbroken chain of title. No liens, no encumbrances, no HOA covenant attached ever." The room changed. It didn't change the way it does in movies. No gasps, no dramatic music. It changed the way rooms change when the air pressure shifts. Dana Brennan pulled the deed toward her and read it line by line. Trevino leaned in from his side and read it upside down. The Hightower rep stopped flipping pages and looked at Karen with a question on his face that he hadn't decided whether to ask yet. Karen's jaw tightened. "That deed is outdated. The HOA assumed jurisdiction over non-compliant properties under the Community Development Clause of the CC&Rs. The board has legal authority to—" Paul placed a second document on the table. "The HOA Covenants Property Schedule. Appendix B, 62 parcels listed, 62 lot numbers, legal descriptions, and plat references. This is the property schedule from the Brayburn Estates Covenant, as filed with the county in 2002. It lists every parcel subject to HOA jurisdiction." He paused. "Parcel 14 is not on this list. It has never been on this list. The HOA's own founding document excludes Mr. Hale's property." Brennan set the deed down and picked up the property schedule. She scanned the page, ran her finger down the parcel numbers, and stopped at the gap where 14 should have been. She looked at Karen. "Ms. Whitfield, this schedule doesn't include the subject property." Karen's voice came faster now. "The boundary map clearly shows that parcel within the HOA's geographic footprint. The board relied on the site plan when—" "A developer's site plan is not a legal instrument," Paul said. "It's a marketing document. It doesn't convey jurisdiction, authority, or ownership. The covenant's property schedule does, and your client's property is not on it." He wasn't talking to Karen anymore. He was talking to Brennan, to Trevino, to the Hightower rep. He was talking to the room, and the room was listening. Paul reached into his briefcase a third time and placed 2 documents side by side. On the left, Board Resolution Number 2024-09, the authorization Karen had used to list the ranch. 3 signatures, 3 board members, clean and official. On the right, a single-page sworn affidavit signed by Barbara Gage. "This is the resolution Ms. Whitfield provided to the listing agent to authorize the sale. It carries 3 signatures, Whitfield, Simmons, and Gage. He tapped the affidavit. This is a sworn statement from Barbara Gage confirming that she did not sign this resolution, was not consulted about it, and has not attended a board meeting in over a year. The silence that followed was physical. It pressed against the walls. It filled the space between the water pitcher and the signature folders that nobody was going to sign. Trevino was the first to move. He closed his tablet, pulled his pen off the folder, and pushed his chair back 6 inches from the table, not standing, but separating, creating distance. His face had the expression of a man who just realized the ground he was standing on wasn't ground at all. "You told me you had legal authority to sell this property," he said to Karen. He wasn't loud, he was precise. "You showed me board documents. You presented yourself as an authorized representative. If that resolution is forged..." He stopped himself, looked at his tablet, looked at the door. "I'm calling my broker, right now." He stood up, stepped into the hallway, and pulled out his phone. The Hightower rep removed his reading glasses and set them on the purchase agreement he'd been reviewing. His voice was flat and controlled in the way that people with lawyers on retainer sound when they already know a phone call is coming. "I put $30,000 in escrow for this transaction. If the seller has no legal authority to sell, I want to know who's responsible for my losses. Today." He wasn't asking Karen, he was looking at Brennan, but Karen answered anyway. There's been a miscommunication. The board acted in good faith. I can provide additional documentation that clarifies the... "Ms. Whitfield." Dana Brennan closed her laptop. The click was small, but in that room it sounded like a lock turning. "I'm halting this closing effective immediately. The deed on this table does not match the authorization documents you provided. The title cannot be transferred when ownership is in dispute, and based on what I'm seeing, it isn't in dispute at all." She straightened the 2 stacks of unsigned documents and placed them back in her file. "I'm also required to report this to the State Real Estate Commission. A closing initiated with potentially forged authorization documents is a mandatory reporting event." Karen's face had lost its architecture. The blazer, the posture, the rehearsed confidence, all of it had been scaffolding, and the scaffolding was coming down. She looked at the deed on the table. She looked at the affidavit. She looked at the empty chair where Trevino had been sitting. She opened her mouth, closed it, and opened it again. "I was acting on behalf of the board. The board voted. The minutes reflect a motion to explore acquisition," I said. It was the first time I'd spoken in that room. Everyone looked at me. Not a motion to sell, not a motion to list, not a motion to forge a resolution and put my ranch on MLS for 60% of market value. You took a vague board motion from 18 months ago and turned it into authorization to sell property you have no jurisdiction over, using a signature from a woman who says she never signed it. I looked at her across the table. The same table where she'd planned to sign away my family's land. The same room where she'd expected to close a deal on a property she'd never owned. "You spent 3 years trying to take my family's ranch, Karen. You should have checked whose name was on the deed." Karen stared at me. No comeback, no reframe, no "the board will review this" or "you're welcome to hire a lawyer." Just silence. The particular silence of a person who has run out of versions of the story. Brennan was already on the phone with the Real Estate Commission. Trevino was in the hallway with his broker. The Hightower rep was texting someone, probably his attorney. And Karen sat at the head of a table full of unsigned documents, surrounded by the wreckage of a transaction that had been dead the moment I walked through the door. I picked up my deed, placed it back in the manila folder, and walked out. Alderman was leaning against his sedan in the parking lot, arms folded. He didn't ask how it went. He'd seen Trevino come out first, phone pressed to his ear, pacing the sidewalk with the look of a man trying to get ahead of a problem. He'd seen enough. "It's done," I said. Alderman smiled. The first real smile I'd seen from him since the night he'd come to my door with a manila folder and a question he'd been carrying for a year and a half. "It's done." The State Real Estate Commission opened their investigation the following Monday. Dana Brennan had filed her report within hours of the halted closing. Mandatory reporting, she'd said, and she meant it. By Tuesday, an investigator from the Commission's Enforcement Division had contacted Paul with a list of documents they wanted. The forged board resolution number barred 2024-09, Barbara Gage's affidavit, the MLS listing, the authorization Karen had given Steve Trevino, and the HOA covenants property schedule. Paul sent everything by certified mail that afternoon. Every page stamped, every copy notarized, every lie Karen had told now sitting in a government file with her name on it. By the end of the second week, the county district attorney's office had opened a separate criminal inquiry. The charges being explored were real estate fraud, forgery of an official document, and filing a fraudulent lien, the $4,200 in fines Karen had threatened to attach to a property she had no jurisdiction over. Paul told me the DA's office had already interviewed Barbara Gage, who confirmed under oath that she'd never signed the resolution and had never authorized the sale of any property. Karen hired an attorney. I don't know what she told him, but whatever defense she was building didn't stop the dominoes from falling. Steve Trevino's brokerage, Bennett & Cole Realty, launched their own internal review within days of the closing. Trevino had listed a property based on authorization documents that turned out to be forged. His license was at risk. His broker was furious. Within a month, the brokerage filed a civil suit against Karen personally for fraudulent misrepresentation, professional liability exposure, and damages to the firm's reputation. Trevino told Paul in a phone call that he'd been in real estate for 14 years and had never once had a closing halted for suspected forgery. He said it like a man who was still trying to process how close he'd come to being part of a crime without knowing it. The Hightower Land Group got their $30,000 back from escrow. Then they called their attorneys. The last I heard, they were exploring a separate civil action against Karen for breach of contract, fraud, and lost opportunity costs. A developer doesn't fly a representative from Austin and put earnest money on a property to walk away with nothing. Someone was going to pay for their wasted time, and it wasn't going to be me. Every fine Karen had ever issued against my property, all $4,200, was voided. Not reduced, not negotiated, voided entirely. My ranch had never been under HOA jurisdiction. Every notice, every certified letter, every compliance inspection by Dennis in his polo shirt, all of it was legally meaningless. It had always been legally meaningless. Karen had just been loud enough and persistent enough to make it feel real. The emergency HOA meeting happened 3 weeks after the closing. This time, Karen wasn't standing at the front of the room. She wasn't there at all. Her attorney had advised her not to attend, probably the first good legal advice she'd received in years. Dennis Simmons wasn't there either. His name was on the forged resolution as a co-signer, and whatever conversation he'd had with his own lawyer had apparently convinced him that showing his face at a community meeting was not in his best interest. The meeting was packed. 50-something homeowners in that same beige clubhouse with the fluorescent lights and stackable chairs. But the energy was different. The last time this many people had been in this room, Karen had been showing them renderings of a park on stolen land. Now the projector was off, the screen was folded up, and people were talking to each other in a way I'd never seen at a Brayburn meeting. Not whispering, not checking phones, not staring at their laps, actually talking. Mr. Alderman stood up first. He didn't shout, he didn't grandstand. He spoke the way a retired history teacher speaks when he's waited a long time to say something he knows is true and important. He told them about the Chavez family. He told them about the double lot Karen had pressured Luis into selling for 60% of market value. He told them about the community garden that was built on a family's home. A home they'd lost because they couldn't afford to fight a woman with a binder and a board that did whatever she told them to do. He told them about the closed session meeting minutes, about the motion to acquire Parcel 14, about the 3-to-1 vote, about his lone dissent and Karen's claim that a property attorney had reviewed the matter, a claim he was now certain had been fabricated. The room was silent when he finished, not the old HOA silence, the scared kind, the compliant kind. This was different. This was the silence of people hearing something they'd suspected for a long time finally said out loud. Tom Beecham, the engineer who'd asked Karen the question she wouldn't answer at the last meeting, stood up next. He moved that the board be dissolved and reconstituted. The motion was seconded before he finished his sentence. The vote was unanimous. They elected a new board that night. 3 homeowners, Beecham, a woman named Sandra Park who'd lived in Brayburn for 12 years and had never served, and Alderman himself. Their first official act was a resolution stating that the HOA recognized it had no jurisdiction over Parcel 14, had never had jurisdiction, and that all prior enforcement actions against the property were rescinded. Their second act was establishing term limits, financial transparency requirements, and a rule that no closed session vote could authorize any expenditure or property action without a full community notification period. Their third act was quieter. They voted to send a formal apology to Luis and Maria Chavez and to open a review of the circumstances under which their property had been acquired. Alderman told me later that Sandra Park had drafted the letter herself, and that she'd stayed an hour after the meeting to get the wording right. Several neighbors came to see me in the days after the meeting, not all at once, one by one, the way people do when they're carrying something they've needed to say for a while. The Parkers came first. They stood on my porch, the same porch where Alderman had stood that Thursday night, and Mrs. Parker said, "We should have spoken up sooner. We saw what she was doing. We just didn't know how to stop her." I told her what I believed, which was the truth, that Karen had built a system designed to make sure nobody could stop her. She'd used fines and fear the way some people use locks and walls, to keep everyone inside their own small space, afraid to move. That system was gone now. A Saturday morning, about 6 weeks after the closing. Early, the sun was just clearing the tree line on the east side of the property, turning the pasture that pale gold color it gets before the heat sets in. I walked out to the barn to check on the horses. They were already up, standing at the fence rail, waiting for feed the way they do every morning. Calm, patient, unaware that anything had changed. I walked to the front gate. The lockbox Karen had clamped onto the latch was gone. I'd cut it off the day of the closing with a pair of bolt cutters, dropped it in the trash without ceremony. The holes where the for sale signposts had been hammered into the ground by the realtor were still faintly visible, but the grass had grown over them. In another month, you wouldn't know they'd been there at all. I ran my hand along the top rail of the gate, the one my father welded from scrap iron, the one with his initials cut into the crossbar. It was warm from the early sun, solid, unchanged. My mailbox was empty. No certified letters, no compliance notices, no envelopes with HOA letterhead and Karen's name printed in bold capitals at the bottom. Just an empty mailbox at the end of a driveway that led to a ranch that had been in my family for over 40 years. Later that morning, Alderman came by. He parked in the same spot he'd parked the night he'd brought me the meeting minutes. Nervous, looking over his shoulder, carrying a manila folder like it was contraband. This time he walked up the drive slowly, hands in his pockets, looking around at the pasture like he was seeing it for the first time. I poured 2 cups of coffee and we sat on the porch. He didn't bring a folder this time. He didn't look over his shoulder. He just sat and drank his coffee and watched the horses graze in the field my father cleared before any of this. The subdivision, the HOA, the fines, the threats, the forgery, the closing that never closed, before any of it existed. "Nice morning," he said. "Yeah," I said, "it is." The ranch was still mine, it always had been.